Today, Saskatchewan Rivers Public School Board and Carlton Comprehensive Public High School are honored to host today's presentation from Mr. Leipciger. On behalf of Carlton Comprehensive Public High School and Saskatchewan Rivers Public School Division, I'd like to welcome all student, staff, and honored guests. Now I'd like to welcome to the podium a friend of mine, the president of our student council, Rahul Parekh, and he's going to talk about our division's Day of the Child. Rahul.
Children are the world's most valuable resource and its best hope for the future. John F. Kennedy, former President of the United States of America. Today, we're all gathered here today, if you can see, dressed in blue, at least many of us are, and many of us have bracelets on our hands. The reason for these bracelets is because we're here to commemorate and honor Child Rights Day. Proclaimed by the General Assembly of the United Nations on the 20th November of 1959, it took about 30 years to gather up all the resources and tools to get a few child rights down. It is later enforced on November 20th in 1989 and took full effect in 1990. I'm part of a group called the Student Voice. The Student Voice is a group of leaders that come from every high school in the SRSD region in PA and area and gather together to basically represent students. I'm the president of this organization, and we felt like one of our first goals as a group was to really commemorate and honor this day. Because on this day, we recognize child rights. On this day, we recognize that we are so lucky here in Prince Albert and in other areas, a few of us are, to have these rights. In fact, in places other than Canada, many children don't even have basic rights such as education, the right to food, and so on. In fact, even here in Prince Albert, we see there's a lack of rights for everyone. Some kids don't know where their next meal is coming from. Some kids don't know if they have the basic rights that a child needs to have. We honestly believe and truly believe that we have to recognize that we understand that child rights are important. Therefore, to raise awareness, Student Voice decided to tell everyone to wear blue today and to buy and purchase these bracelets, luckily by the Carlton administration, who offered a $1,200 donation towards a child rights foundation here in Prince Albert, called the Early Childhood Council, that could ensure that child rights are brought to everyone in Prince Albert who doesn't have them. But more importantly, we felt this day linked very well with what our presentator, Mr. Leipciger, will bring forward to you here today, because he will be able to tell you about the rights that were taken away from him during this dreadful and traumatic experience. Hopefully we can take this understanding and we can understand that we are so lucky to have this opportunity to have an individual come forward and tell us about the rights that were taken away from him, and recognize and actually further appreciate the rights that we have as students here in Carlton and all over Prince Albert. So I hope together as Student Voice, you all help celebrate Child Rights Day, and if you haven't already, you can go purchase a bracelet from the general offices for about $1 to further the donation, and really respect and understand this privilege that you have with having such a great speaker come forward to you here today and tell you about the rights that were taken away from him. And hopefully this helps you reflect and appreciate the rights that you are lucky to have. Thank you.
And now I'd like to ask all of you to please welcome to our school Judge David Arnott, the Chief Commissioner of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission, to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to be here today. Good afternoon, students and staff and visitors to Carlton High School. Saskatchewan's largest high school, as I understand it, and Carlton Comprehensive is well known. It's so nice to see so many students out here today. You are all very important members of a cohort of individuals, a young cohort of individuals who are the last generation of young people to hear the story of the Holocaust from an eyewitness, from a survivor. You have a responsibility to be a witness. You have to listen very, very carefully to everything the witness tells you, the survivor tells you, to ensure that you can be a witness, to ensure that you can take your responsibility and deliver the knowledge you get here today with pride, confidence, courage, and respect. I want you to be the best possible Canadian citizens you can be, and you're going to be assisted in reaching that goal by what Mr. Leipciger tells you this afternoon. Mr. Leipciger is a very accomplished individual. He's an engineer. He spent much of his professional life designing and building hospitals, a very accomplished person. He's 88 years old, and he has lots of energy. He's really motivated to help us all learn here today. Now, I'm going to do something unusual that he's not expecting, and I want you to help me thank him in advance of what he's going to say. I have for Mr. Leipciger the book Words Matter. What is this book? This book is the judgment in the Supreme Court of Canada on the hate speech case that the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission took to the Supreme Court of Canada 3 years ago. This case was won 6-0, a slam dunk. 100% of the judges supported the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission in saying that hate speech is anathema and it cannot be tolerated in Canadian society. I'm very proud of this leather-bound book. It's the highest honor the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission can give to any individual. We've only given out 6 of these books, and I now want you to help me thank Mr. Leipciger in advance of his presentation to receive this book on behalf of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission and every Canadian who knows and understands their responsibilities. Come forward, please, sir.
Thank you, Judge Arnott. It is a great pleasure and an honor for me to receive this wonderful gift and award, and I'm humbled by it. And I'm humbled by the words that were said here before, and the great responsibility that was placed on my shoulder because of all of you who came here to listen to me. And I'm just a humble survivor of an atrocity that happened 75 years ago, of which you only know through history and reading and fiction now. But many of you are connected to me with who you are and where you come from, the fact that we are all immigrants, and we're also connected to the indigenous community with which the Jewish people have much in common. We have, both nations have been subjugated to untold suppressions and cultural genocides. And the lofty words of the Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, I would think we thought, thank you, I'm having, okay, you want me to use this mic or you want to use this mic? Okay. 2 mics. And the lofty words of the 48 Human Rights Declaration, we thought would end all discrimination and would certainly end the hatred of people against people. We thought that war will be no more and that hatred was killed. But as you know, we are wrong. Only a few days ago, there was a massacre in Paris. Innocent lives were lost, and we ask why. Why has the world not learned from the past, and why has the world not done something about it? And, of course, I don't have the answers. Smarter and brighter people than me don't have the answers. And so we are handing over to you an imperfect world. We're handing over to you an imperfect world, which we as the elders hope you will change and you will make a difference. You see, birth is a birth of accident. We don't have the choice who we are born to. We don't choose our parents. We don't choose our religion. We're born into it. But you know something? We have the power to change it. We have the power to change the destiny of the world, and we have the power to change our destiny. Our destiny can be what you young people will determine it to be. It can be racist and hateful, or it can be one of peace and tranquility and acceptance of the other, not tolerance, acceptance, because tolerance has a condition. I tolerate you, provided that you are going to change and be like me. No, that's not acceptable. It has to be acceptance of the people the way they are, provided that they are peace-loving and respect you equally. So, my dear friends, I'm talking about acceptance. And it is a wonderful occasion that we are celebrating the year of the child. Kennedy said, our future depends on our children. And Hitler said, if we murder the Jewish children, they have no future. And I was supposed to be one of those that was supposed to be murdered, like the rest of my generation. You see, I'm here, one of the few survivors, one of the few child survivors who were not supposed to survive. We were either imprisoned at a young age, hidden by wonderful people who risked their lives to conceal or hide a child. And those were Christian people who were hiding Jewish children at the risk of their own lives, whether it be Polish or Ukrainian or Russians or French or Dutch. Those were our heroes. That's the heroes of the dark era. Those are the ones that I salute today, and I ask you to salute as well. But I'm not here to lecture to you. I'm here to tell you my story. And by telling you my story, I hope that we will understand each other and that we will learn something from each other. 1939, I was 11 years old. The Nazis in 1935 declared that the Jews are Untermenschen, less than human, and therefore our culture can be destroyed and our lives can be taken from us. The human rights were taken away. And that's what Judge Arnott was talking about, that the human rights are the beginning and the end of our liberty, of our free democracy. At 11, I learned what it means not to have any rights. The first right they took away from me was attending school. They decided that at the age of 11, I did not need any more schooling. And no Jewish child needed any more schooling because they had different plans for us. And they proceeded to enslave us and put us into ghetto and concentration camps and labor camps all over Germany to extract the last bit of energy that we have with minimal of food, with no freedom and no liberty, and 12-hour a day hard labor. I was fortunate. My mother had the foresight to enroll me into a school of an electrician. And at the age of 12, I entered the school for a half a year to become an electrician's helper. And after graduating, I was fortunate that I could get a job in a German shoe factory, making and repairing shoes for miners, for the coal mines that were around us. But that was not enough for the Nazis. They did not value our work in our ghettos. And then they proceeded to remove the ghettos. And they were going to go ahead and resettle us. What does resettlement mean? I will tell you in a second. But before I do, I'm going to change mics because I like to move around. I like to make contact with you through your eyes and be closer to you rather than hide behind this. Okay. Are we good? Yep. I feel much better when I'm free to move. It reminds me that we have freedom. And I was just telling you that they didn't feel that it was enough, our contribution to the German industry wasn't enough, or that they didn't value it because they diverted trains that were delivering materials to the front. And they were at that point in 1943, they were already in need of transportation and everything they could get. But what they do is they took trains and they deported Jews from the ghettos. And they deported us supposedly to the east, where they promised us better lodging, better food, and jobs. And we, not knowing differently, not having had an experience, the world has never experienced this before, so we will allow them to believing them that what they were saying was true, because after all, they were the government, the ruling power of Europe. They had 3/4 of Europe under their control. How could we feel that they had an evil scheme in their minds? We didn't. In 1943, August the 1st, was a Sunday night. Everybody was in the ghetto. The Nazis came. They looked for us. They searched the buildings, and they took us out the way we stood. Those who hid were not allowed to bring a parcel with, and those who went voluntarily could bring with them a suitcase. One suitcase. And I'm asking you, what would you pack in that one suitcase? You are leaving home. You never know when you're going to be back. I sympathize with the Native children who were taken from their homes, torn from their parents, possibly never to see them again. I know we are today in a period of reconciliation and truth, and that truth must be brought forward, what our nation did to the indigenous people. We cannot sweep it under the carpet any longer. It has to come forward. And it touches me when I talk about my own childhood. And it touches me when I, at the age of 15, had to leave my home and leave and not know where I'm going, and be totally at the mercy of the people who took me away. I was fortunate that my father was with me. But we were only in the train. We just visualize it. A boxcar, 80 to 100 people packed in a boxcar. One little slit for window. You're going to, you don't know where. Our group of my family, which was fortunate to be together till that period, consisted of my sister, my mother, my father, and myself. 4 of us. We huddled together in the center of that boxcar, and my mother said, after the war, whoever survives will meet at my mother's, my grandmother's neighbor, a Christian woman. The door to the boxcar was open, and we arrived at a Royal Road siding we didn't know where. We couldn't see where we were. There was no buildings in front of us or behind us. We were ordered to go into 2 columns, men on one side, women on the other. And we're standing on this platform, and I was still standing with my mother when my father came over to me and grabbed me by my sleeve and said, "You come with me." Children of 12 or younger could stay with the mothers regardless of sex. But my father, so I was 15 and I wanted to stay with my mother. My father came and grabbed me up and he says, "You come with me." And we stood in the first row of 5 men, and a Nazi officer came over and he pointed at my father and he said, "You go over there and line the men that I sent to you in rows of 5. And to me, he didn't speak, he just motioned over his shoulder. And I went to this lineup. And I was now in another lineup, the first in a row with 4 others. And I was trying to orient myself as what to happen. I was 15 years old, like many of you, and I was self-sufficient. I worked for 3 years. I knew I could look after myself. I could do any job that was given to me. I was not worried about keeping myself alive. So I looked around and I saw my father with the young people, and I saw my mother and my sister were selected to be with the young people, and I was quiet. I didn't panic. I saw that things are okay. I was in a group with people who thought that this is going to be the deportation, the area where they promised us that they're going to deport us to the east, and this was going to be it. And I was becalmed. When suddenly I heard my father call my name, and I jumped out of the lineup, and I stood in front of him. On attention, he was standing there with a Nazi officer, and he says, "This is my son. He's 17. He's an electrician." The Nazi commented on the fact that I looked like 12. My father gave him an explanation. And then the Nazi talked to me for maybe 3 seconds. And he says, "Okay, you can go." And my father grabbed me by my arm, he took me and put me in between 2 other people. And after a while, we marched off. Finally, we were marched into a barrack, an empty barrack. We're told to disrobe. They show our hair, and they put a tattoo on my arm, 133,628. That became my name. That became everything that was about me was my name. I was no longer a human being. I was just a number. And they can do with me anything they wanted. I was just a number. And then they gave us a lecture. And the lecture was, "You are in a concentration camp. This is no sanatorium. You will do as you are told, or else. And the else meant that if you don't do as you're told, you're going to join your brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and grandparents who are now processed in the gas chamber. Processed in a gas chamber. How do you process human beings in a gas chamber? You drop some crystals of cyanide through the chimney and you murder them. That's what it calls processed, the euphemism for murder. And how can your mind withstand what you just heard? Just imagine you are there in my place and you being told that your family, your dear ones, and everybody that you know is being gassed to death. And you ask, why? How could it be happening in the middle of the 20th century? How could people be gassed to death for no reason whatsoever? They had committed no crime. They did not fight the Nazis. We were working for them. You would even consider us collaborators with them because we kept their machinery of war going. But that was not enough. They had our possessions. They had everything that belonged to us, and that was not enough. What they wanted is our death. I'm telling you that it's difficult to even think about it today, over 70 years ago, 73 years ago, 72 years ago. I realized that what the Nazis did, he saved my life by allowing me to go from one column to the other. Now, a lot of people say, doesn't it prove that they were human beings, that they could respond with humaneness, that they could decide to do a good deed? And I say that's exactly what the problem was. The problem was that these were human beings, just like you and I, no different, were brought up the same way, possibly differently socialized to believe that they were the master race and everybody else was less than them. But other than that, we were all human beings. And human beings can do things to human beings that no animal on this planet will do to another animal other than for food. My dear friends, this is the type of world we live in. In this type of world, we must change. I was in a concentration camp, and I was pleading to God. I was saying, why is this happening? Why is this happening to us? And there was no answer. And there still is no answer as why there is hatred in the world, and why innocent people are dying. Eventually, I was fortunate to get out of Auschwitz, to go in a concentration camp, work 12 hours a day in German industry for 16 months. And then January 1945, finally, the Soviet Union was advancing and was at the gates of our camp when the Nazis decided that they're not going to let us go, that they still had use for us, so they dragged us from one camp to the other. And every time we went from one camp to the other, we lost 1/3 of our people. And it wasn't only Jews in the concentration camp. By this time, when I came to a new concentration camp called Großrosen on Fünfteichen, the camp was 6,000 men. At first, there was only 600 Jews who were transferred from Auschwitz to that camp. But eventually, our number dwindled, and the majority of our prisoners that were dying with us were Poles, Ukrainians, Frenchmen, political prisoners from other countries. There were the Roma people, or better known as gypsies. There were the homosexuals and the petty criminals of German descent. But the German nationals and the Poles had a sentence of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Only us, the Jews, the gypsies, and the homosexuals had no sentence. Our sentence was a life sentence. We were destined to die in the concentration camp. And that's how the war progressed from one year to the other till 1945, when the German world was shrinking. And we were sitting in the camp, and we were wondering if our liberation will come in time. We were sick, our bodies were depleted, we're walking skeletons. Typhus fever has invaded us, and thousands of people died even after the war was ended. We were fortunate. On May the 2nd, 1945, the Americans arrived at the gates of our camp, and we were liberated. And we became survivors. We became the Holocaust survivors. So what does it mean to be a Holocaust survivor? And I'm going to do a mental exercise with you. I'm going to ask you to put into your mind your loved ones, your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your grandparents, your cousins, your aunts and uncles, your friends, your schoolmates. Put them in your head. How many do you have? 50, 60, maybe more. And then, after a very short period of time, of maybe 2 years or less, as in the case of the Hungarian population, 4 months. 4 months. And all of those people who you have in your head are gone. And you by yourself, maybe with a brother, maybe with a father, as I was, and they're all gone. They all have been murdered. And you by yourself. That's what it means to be a survivor. But you know, I am told that there's 1,700 of us, because I'm one of you. 1,700 of us here. And after 1,700 people here, only 10 to 15% would survive in the first place. And that's what it means to be a survivor. But I don't want you to go home with the idea that you've lost everything. I want you to go home and tell your parents and your brothers and sisters, I love you. And they'll say, what happened to you? What came over you? How come the sudden euphemistic expression of love? And you tell them what I told you now, that if by chance they were born in Poland or Germany or Hungary or any other country in Europe, and if they by chance happen to be Jewish, we wouldn't have them. they would not be your brother's assistant, they would not be there. So therefore, you are thanking whoever, whatever, the fact that you are together and you have them there to be with you and to love you, and you love them. I want you to do that. And I want you also to tell them the story that I told you today of what it means to be a survivor and what it means to be less than human, declared by another nation. I will stop now, and I'm going to allow you to ask questions. Thank you.
All right, so at this time, this is a chance to ask some questions from Nate. So I have a Twitter handle that is ready to be moderated here, and it is hashtag CCHS, capital N-A-T-E, so CCHS Nate. I have a question already, so we'll start with one, and then I'll just moderate as the questions continue. So the first question, Nate, was, what are your thoughts on the Syrian refugee crisis?
What are my thoughts on the Syrian refugee question? It's a very complicated question because the Syrian refugees are not uniform. They're not all monolithic. There are many types of people among the Syrians who have been displaced. There are Kurds, there are Christians, there are Coptics, there are Yazidis who are different than Muslims. There are Sunnis and there are Shiites, and they come from different parts of the world. They're all put together under the rubric of Syrian refugees. And my dear friends, we cannot make that type of a declaration of bigoted, I'm looking for a word, generalization. Generalization is a crime because it is based on the stereotypes. And it does not allow for individuals, and it's based usually at the worst element. The generalization is usually based on the worst elements of that community or those people. And I'm very glad that we are letting the Syrian refugees come in. Now there's another group of people, which we call the migrants. They also come from supposedly from Syria. But if you delve into the individuality of those people, you'll find that they're not all from Syria, that they come from different parts of different countries. Some comes from Turkey, some comes from Iran, some come from Iraq, and some come from Lebanon, and different parts of the Middle East. And they're all running for their lives. Of course, there are some that are meant to destroy our way of life, that are there with a devilish purpose to take away our freedoms. They would like to use our freedom to change us, and we must not allow that to happen. Therefore, we must be careful in who we let in, but we should not make a predetermination just because they come from one part of the world, that they are part of the ISIS. You see, I believe that ISIS people who have a particular fight and a particular ideology of how the world should exist and who should be allowed to live and who should die, that particular philosophy is not universal, among the Syrian refugees, if at all. And if an ISIS person wants to come to Canada, he does not have to use the vehicle of refugees. They have money and they have means, as we've seen in France in the last episode. We found that the people who belonged to ISIS were Frenchmen, they were citizens of France, and they were not part of the refugees that came into France at this particular point in time. So, my dear friends, I feel that Canada is a big country, and we can move over a little bit and let in more refugees and give them freedom and show them that we can be generous and that we can share our traditions and freedoms with them.
I have a pretty popular question here right now. It seems to be being asked by a lot of students. And it is, what would you say to Hitler if he were alive today? And he was in front of you, basically. He was here, you could see him.
Well, in the words of another survivor who was here some years ago, said, I would say, we won. But that's... maybe it is simplistic, but it is the truth. You see, Hitler tried to destroy our youth, tried to kill our kids, our children. So the Jewish community in Israel decided to create a March of Living, a March of the Living. What's the March of the Living? Grade 11 students from all over the world, Jewish, come together in Poland, and we march from Auschwitz to Birkenau, a 3-kilometer track. And we wear blue jackets with the Star of David on the back. And we march in silence. We do not sing, we do not talk. We march the 3 kilometers in silence to commemorate those children that walked silently to their death. And usually, the number of people that come are between 12 and 20,000 people a year. And Hitler gave me a one-way ticket to Auschwitz, and now I've come back. I've come back with a two-way ticket. I've come back with thousands of my fellow Jews, with thousands of young, intelligent, wonderful human beings, our future, and we're marching in silence to Birkenau, and we declare, we are here, and Hitler, you are dead. And your 1,000-year Reich that you promised your superior people who you indoctrinated, that the Aryan people are superior, and then they should be the kings and the masters of the world, are nowhere to be found. And that, my dear friends, is truly a victory over the forces of evil.
Lots of good questions here. This is a kind of a two-part question, Nate. First part is, did you have any thoughts of escape ever? And what kept you going day to day?
Very good questions. Escape was almost impossible. Individuals did escape, and as a matter of fact, a number of underground people escaped from Auschwitz. Polish Christians who were interned in Auschwitz I managed to escape, and they had a very difficult time. Not very many did escape. Most of them were brought back in bags or just dragged into the camp, deposited in front of all the assembled, and said, "This is what happens if you escape." And we, as prisoners in the camp, had to suffer for the escapees. You see, every time a prisoner escaped, they assembled us on the Appellplatz, on the mustering ground. And we had to stand at attention till they found them. And this was after work, after 12 hours of work, before we were given any food. We were to stand on attention on this Appellplatz. And many fainted, many died, many fell, and if you fell, the couple was sure right there with his stick to clobber you to death. So when somebody would try to escape, he not only had to think about his own life, but about the life of his fellow prisoners. It was the same thing. Some people ask, when you were in ghetto, why didn't you escape? Why didn't you run out and hide? And the question was, first of all, if you did escape and they caught you, you would not only be punished, but your entire family would be punished. And your entire family would be taken and shot. And can you, as an individual, endanger the lives of your family by trying to save your own life? Or imprisonment? And that was a responsibility that weighed very heavily on us. There were some that escaped, as I said in the beginning, and they managed to get out. And they managed to get to Slovakia from Auschwitz, which is not far to the Slovakian border. And they managed to get to England. And they told the world, the British, the Polish government in exile, what they were doing in Auschwitz, that they are preparing. This was when they escaped in 1943, at the end of 43, and they were telling the world that the Nazis are preparing Auschwitz to bring in the Hungarian Jews, which numbered 800,000 in 1944, and that they're going to murder them in cold blood. And they asked that they bomb Auschwitz or the tracks, or that the world speak out against Germany, that they would promise them that they would be punished for what they were about to do. But the world was silent. Nothing happened. It was not strategic to bomb Auschwitz. Also, they bombed industrial installation nearby. They would not bomb Auschwitz. So the escape was not possible. So now the only thing is, how do you survive? Second part of the question. How do you survive from day to day? It wasn't from day to day. It was from minute to minute. Every minute, something could happen. If you stepped out of line, you could have been hit. If you didn't walk fast enough, you could be hit. And every time you were punished, and every one time somebody hit you with a club, you could die. You had no more resistance to physical abuse. Of course, I had a different problem. You see, I was a kid. I was a child. in an adult prison. And there's no secret that even in other societies, the children are being abused by other prisoners. And I was abused too. And I'm saying this to you, and I'm confessing it to you. I was something that I was ashamed of admitting for many decades, certainly not to my children who were younger or my grandchildren. But I finally had to come to the realization that by hiding the fact of my sexual abuse, I was letting the world or the perpetrators off the hook. So I came out and I decided to put it in my book, which those of you who want to read will be able to obtain copies from your teachers in a couple weeks. And decided to come out. And I'm addressing this community here because I know that many of your parents or grandparents were abused as well. And they didn't have the courage to come forward and say it any more than I did. See, I was ashamed. I thought that I did something wrong, that it attracted the abuser, that he selected me to be abused. But it wasn't that at all. I was not guilty. I was just a victim, as many of you may have been, or your parents may have been. So every day the survival depended on doing your things, just like the children in the schools, in the residential schools, had no choice to escape, and the only way to survive for them was to go along and live from day to day with the hope, and that's the key operator, and the hope that this torture will soon end one way or the other.
Just for the sake of time, Nate, this is probably our last question. So the question is, what was your mother and sister's name, and what happened to them?
Thank you for this question. It's very dear to my heart because I loved my sister and I loved my mother very, very much. And when I saw them in Auschwitz-Birkenau, standing among the young people, I had great hopes that they would survive, that they would be sent to some concentration camp in Germany, and then that they would survive. As a matter of fact, the survival mechanism was hope, right? And my father realized that my mother and my sister did not see me being taken from the gas line to the labor line. And they most likely thought that I perished right after we arrived in Auschwitz-Birkenau. So my father decided to go to work at a particular location. He could volunteer to go there because we are told that the people who went to this particular detachment of labor were sent to a place where they had contact with the women in the camp. So my father volunteered to go and to see if he could get to some women. It didn't matter if he found my mother or my sister, but anybody in the women's camp, and tell them a message that I was alive. My father figured that that would give them added incentive to stay alive, an added incentive for hope that things will change. So he went to work, and he didn't come back. And I was standing in the yard of our block, and I was looking towards the gas chamber and crematorium building. And the crematorium building had stubby chimneys. And the flames from the crematoria were shooting out of the chimney, illuminating the sky and sending millions of sparks into the air. And I was standing there, and it got dark, and my father didn't come back. And I thought that my father's soul would be going up with the flame and the smoke emanating from the crematoria. And I was standing there, and the tears were just flowing because I thought I lost him, and I knew that surviving by myself in the concentration camp of Auschwitz was very, very, very hard and very limited, and that my days would be only numbered. When suddenly the gates to the camp open up, and a group of prisoners is coming back, and among them my father. And I run up to him, and I hug him, and I tell him, what happened? What happened? What did you do? He says, I asked him, did you get in touch with my mother? He says, no, we didn't go near the camp, to the women's camp. And I say, what do you have under your arm? I said, I have a parcel. I have some clothes for you. I says, what happened? So he told me that after they went to work, they came back into the barracks, into the what they used to call Canada, was a transition camp. And they were told that they're going to have showers. And at this point, we didn't know what the gas chamber looked like, whether it had shower heads, and you didn't know whether they went in a huge shower, whether they would be throwing down gas pellets at you, or whether the water would come out. And lo and behold, water came out, and they got a shower. And after the shower, they were getting dressed when a capo, which is a prisoner that's in charge of the clothing department in Auschwitz, came up to him and he says, Jakob, I remember you, I know, you know who I am. And they exchanged geographic notes. And the capo said to my father, he says, you're a tailor. My father says, yes. Well, I can save your life. You can come and work in Canada. Canada, by the way, spelled with K, was a part of the camp where the people who were undressed, whose clothing was left in a pile, the clothes was taken, it was sorted, and the people who worked in that department of the camp had enough more food, they had things they could trade with, and their life was easier and more secure than being in the rest of the camp. So telling him that he could work in the camp of Canada was like giving him a new lease on life. And he says, well, I have a son that's 15 years old and he's in the transition camp. And the man told him, forget your son. Forget your son. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when they're going to find him and they're going to send him into the gas chamber. So save your life. And my father says, no, I want to go back and be with him. And he said, but I need some clothes for him. See, when I came to Auschwitz and they gave us civilian clothes with a KL on our back and paint, they didn't expect boys. They expected men. And I was just a small 15-year-old kid that looked like 12. So when I put the jacket on, I could put it twice around me. And the pants, if I pulled them up, my pants came up to my chest. And I looked like a scarecrow after I rolled up my sleeves and my pants. And I had much less of a chance of surviving a selection which was coming every week to the camp to select out those who were weak or sick or tired or who could not work anymore. And I would be a prime candidate if they saw me in those clothes. So he brought me clothes that fitted me, and when I put them on, I looked again like a human being, which eventually proved to be my salvation and saved my life. So, to finish up the story, you asked what happened to my mother, and what were their names. I evoke their names with a prayer for their souls. My sister's name in Polish was Lina. Her Hebrew name was Blima, meaning flower. My mother's name was a biblical name. Her name was Leah, like one of the daughters of, or daughters-in-law of Jacob. Anyways, that's what their name was. And as you remember, I told you that they said that when we come to, after the war, we should go to our my grandmother's neighbor and find out who survived. They did not come. And later on, I found out that they were murdered in cold blood on Yom Kippur, our holiest day in our Jewish calendar. But my mother's sisters came back. And they were saved by Christian men, Christian families, who hid them for many years, who give them a bed to sleep, who supply them with food, who remove their night pots, and who hid them for months over month. And those, my dear friends, were the righteous among the nations, who at the risk of their own lives saved others. And the question is, how many of us would be willing to put our life on the line to save another human being, some that you didn't even know, that was not even of your religion, that had different customs and different traditions? And would you put your life and your children's lives on the line in order to save a human being? I know the answer. I have to ask myself that same question. And you know, my dear friends, I have difficulty with the answer because I don't know what I would do. We know, none of us know till we're in that situation, till we have to confront another human being that knocks on our door and says, hide me because I'm in danger of being murdered. We don't know what we would do it sitting in our wonderful homes and having our wonderful lives. But I must tell you this, that those people who did risk their lives are my heroes. They're the bright stars in an otherwise black night, which allowed me come out of the camps and not to hate humanity. Because I would be generalizing, and I knew that I would be forgetting those bright stars of human kindness who saved my aunts and thousands of others. And the ground in Yad Vashem in Israel is covered with thousands of trees of righteous among the nations who risked their lives to save another life. So I evoke the memory of my mother and my sister and ask you to cherish it as I do. Thank you.
On behalf of Carlton, Nate, I want to thank you for coming to Prince Albert and our school. I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. I think it's truly inspirational, and I just want us to give him a round of applause for coming and sharing your story.
Thank you.